Hi everyone, I am Dr. David Mercer. Millions of adults over 60 are walking through ordinary days, making toast, reheating leftovers, warming up last night's meat, trusting foods they have eaten for decades, without realizing that some of the most familiar items in the kitchen can create exposures tied to cancer risk when they are processed, browned hard, charred, or reheated the wrong way. Cancer risk rises sharply with age, and by the time people reach their 60s and beyond, the body is no longer responding to decades of accumulated wear in the same forgiving way it once did. This is not a distant problem. It is playing out in neighborhood kitchens, in retirement communities, in family homes, and in the quiet routines of people who believe they are simply being practical, careful, and economical. What makes it especially unsettling is that there is usually no dramatic warning, no alarm, no immediate pain. Just a repeated pattern that feels normal because so many people around us are doing the very same thing. If you are over 60, or if someone you love is, what follows may be some of the most important food risk information you hear this year. I'm going to show you what is happening, why it matters, and exactly what you can do. And you are far from the only one dealing with this. Because what makes this issue so powerful is not one dramatic meal, but a quiet population pattern built out of ordinary habits. Many people who grew up in a generation that hated waste were taught to save everything, stretch every roast, fry potatoes until they looked deeply golden, and warm meat again until it was hot enough to feel done. That mindset came from care, discipline, and survival. It is part of why so many families stayed fed. But when health organizations began reviewing cancer risk across large populations, a troubling pattern started to emerge around processed meats and heavily browned or charred foods. The concern is not that every leftover is dangerous. The concern is that certain foods, prepared or reheated in certain ways, can repeatedly expose the body to compounds linked to cancer over time. Across millions of households, the foods are familiar. Bacon saved from breakfast and crisped again. Hot dogs or sausage rewarmed for lunch. Deli meat heated in a skillet. Burgers cooked once and browned again. Chicken or steak reheated until edges blacken. Fries or hash browns returned to the oven until dark and crunchy. For a generation that was told hot meals, browned edges, and cook it a little longer meant safer, better, or tastier, this is a difficult message. Because the visual cues many people trust most, dark color, crisp texture, smoky flavor, can also be the cues that more unwanted chemical changes have taken place. At the same time, older adults face a second layer of concern that younger people often dismiss: food safety. The same leftovers that may be over-browned are also sometimes left out too long, cooled too slowly, or reheated unevenly. So this conversation is bigger than taste, and bigger than one food trend. It sits at the intersection of cancer prevention, aging, and everyday kitchen routines across an entire community. And once you see how widespread that pattern is, the next question becomes unavoidable. What exactly is happening inside these foods when so many people prepare them this way again and again? What researchers found when they looked at the chemistry of reheated and high-heat foods was striking, and the pattern is consistent across millions of people even though the foods look completely ordinary on the plate. Start with processed meats, things like hot dogs, ham, bacon, sausage, and many deli meats. The World Health Organization classifies processed meat as carcinogenic to humans, with the strongest evidence for colorectal cancer, and the risk rises with the amount eaten over time. That means the problem is not just the cookout or the holiday tray. It is the repeated return of those foods to the microwave, frying pan, toaster oven, or skillet across weeks, months, and years. Then there is the second category, muscle meats such as beef, pork, chicken, and fish when they are cooked or reheated at very high temperatures, especially on a pan, grill, or open flame. The National Cancer Institute explains that high-heat cooking can form heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, compounds shown in laboratory settings to damage DNA in ways that may increase cancer risk. When fat drips and smoke rises, when meat is reheated until the surface hardens, when blackened edges are treated like proof of flavor, that exposure can climb. And there is a third category many people do not suspect because it does not look like a cancer story at all: starchy foods browned hard at high temperatures. Potatoes are a major example. French fries, roasted potatoes, hash browns, and even some breads and crackers can form acrylamide when heated to high temperatures. Now, it is important to be precise here because precision protects trust. The National Cancer Institute says human evidence for dietary acrylamide and cancer risk is inconsistent, so this is not a settled one food causes one cancer story. But it is still a legitimate concern worth reducing, especially when dark browning becomes a daily habit. So when we talk about 4 reheated foods that worry experts most, we are really talking about 4 everyday patterns. Processed meats reheated again, grilled or pan-seared meats reheated to a char, potato-based leftovers browned hard a second time, and meat drippings or smoky blackened bits that people scrape, stir, or pour back over food as flavor. That is the pattern, and the reason it spreads so quietly is that every piece of it can look familiar, thrifty, and normal, right up until you understand what the broader public health picture is showing. The pattern does not stop there, because what makes this especially important for your age group is that older adults are not starting from a blank slate. Advancing age is already the most important overall risk factor for cancer, and the median age of cancer diagnosis is 67. In plain language, by the time someone reaches their 60s or 70s, the body has already accumulated years of exposure to whatever habits have been repeated most often. Food choices, smoking history, weight patterns, physical inactivity, sleep disruption, and the chemical byproducts of cooking methods that once seemed harmless. Think about the routines your parents had, or the routines you built yourself. Bacon in the morning, sandwich meat in the afternoon, grilled meat at gatherings, potatoes browned until they looked right, leftovers reheated until they tasted almost newly cooked. Across the people most at risk for cancer, the pattern is almost identical, not because anyone was careless, but because that was normal life. And there is another layer that matters deeply in later life. Older adults are also more vulnerable to severe foodborne illness. The CDC warns that adults 65 and older are more likely to get sick from germs spread through food, and specifically advises heating deli meats, cold cuts, hot dogs, and similar products to 165 degrees or until steaming hot. So for seniors, some reheated foods bring a double burden. On one side, there is the long-term issue of processed meat and high-heat compounds linked to cancer risk. On the other side, there is the immediate danger of infection when food is stored poorly, left out too long, or reheated unevenly. That is why this conversation feels so personal in this stage of life. Your body may be less forgiving now than it was at 35. Digestion may be slower, recovery may take longer, inflammation may already be higher. And what once seemed like a harmless habit, re-crisping sausage, reheating burgers on a hot pan, eating deli meat straight from the refrigerator, warming fries until they are dark, can hit an older body differently. This is exactly why the community-level data matters. It tells us this is not about panic. It is about understanding which common habits become less safe and less wise as the years go on, and what the overlooked variable is that most households still do not know. What the community-level data shows next is where the real blind spot begins, because most people assume the danger is the food itself, when the deeper issue is often the combination of food type, storage, and reheating style. A hot dog is one thing. A hot dog eaten regularly, stored carelessly, and reheated repeatedly is another. A leftover chicken breast is one thing. A grilled chicken breast reheated until the edges blacken is another. A tray of roasted potatoes is one thing. Potatoes cooked, cooled, and then pushed back into high heat until dark brown and brittle create a very different exposure pattern. Many people over 60 still use visual judgment instead of thermometers, and that old habit can be misleading in both directions. Food can look safe and still be unevenly heated, especially in a microwave. Or it can be overheated to the point of heavy browning in an effort to make sure it's hot, unintentionally increasing compounds people would be better off limiting. The National Cancer Institute notes that acrylamide levels vary based on temperature and cooking time, and that less intense browning can lower exposure. The CDC emphasizes something equally practical. Refrigerate perishable foods promptly, keep the refrigerator at 40 degrees or below, and when reheating in a microwave, make sure the food reaches 165 degrees. Those are not glamorous rules, but they are the kind that change outcomes across entire neighborhoods. There is also a psychological piece here that should not be ignored. For a generation taught not to waste food, throwing something out can feel morally wrong. Trimming off the black parts can feel excessive. Refusing a processed meat platter at a gathering can feel rude. But public health progress often begins when a community updates old definitions of normal. What was normal in one decade is not automatically safe in the next. And once people understand that the real issue is repeated exposure, not one meal, not one holiday, not one sandwich, but the stack of small choices over time, they become much more willing to change. Which brings us to the hopeful part of this story. The simple things people are already doing that are reducing risk without giving up the comfort of eating at home. When health professionals began tracking what actually helps at the household level, the good news was remarkably consistent. People do not need a perfect diet or a gourmet kitchen to lower these risks. They need a handful of reliable habits repeated on purpose. Across communities, one of the strongest improvements comes from simply reducing processed meat frequency. Not never again, but not letting bacon, sausage, deli meat, ham, hot dogs, and similar foods become automatic defaults for breakfast, lunch, and leftovers. Another effective shift is changing how meat is reheated. Instead of taking yesterday's steak or chicken back to a screaming hot pan until it hardens and darkens, people are using gentler heat, shorter times, covered reheating, or adding moisture so the food warms without charring. The National Cancer Institute also points to practical steps that make a real difference when cooking meat at high temperatures. Microwave meat briefly before grilling so it spends less time over intense heat. Turn it more often. Avoid direct flame exposure. Cut away charred portions. And avoid gravies made from drippings. Those are small kitchen choices, but at population scale they matter. On the food safety side, the CDC's recommendations are equally straightforward. Refrigerate leftovers within 2 hours, use shallow containers so foods cool faster, keep the refrigerator cold enough, and when reheating in the microwave, verify that food reaches 165 degrees. For older adults, heating deli meats and hot dogs until steaming hot is especially important. Many families are also discovering that the easiest risk reduction is substitution. Reheat beans, lentils, soup, oatmeal, fish, or softer casseroles instead of repeatedly reheating cured meat or frying leftover potatoes back to a dark crust. I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want to know. How many people in your life, family, close friends, neighbors, do you think are dealing with these habits right now without realizing the long-term risk? Give me a number in the comments, even a rough estimate. Because those numbers, added together from everyone watching, reveal how widespread this really is. And once a community starts naming a pattern honestly, it becomes much easier for each individual household to make the next change. And what this means for you personally changes what you can do starting today. Because the first step is not fear, it is identification. Walk into your kitchen and ask a very simple question. Which reheated foods show up here over and over again? For many people over 60, the answer is immediate. Number 1 is processed meat reheated again. Bacon, sausage, ham, hot dogs, deli slices, leftover meatloaf made from processed blends, or smoked meats eaten several times a week. Number 2 is leftover grilled or pan-seared meat taken back to high heat until browned or charred. Number 3 is potato leftovers, fries, hash browns, roasted potatoes, tots, pushed toward a second deep browning because that feels more satisfying than warming them gently. Number 4 is the hidden flavor habit, scraping up blackened bits, pouring drippings back over meat, or treating smoky, burned crust as the best part. Once you identify your pattern, the next move is to interrupt it. Limit processed meats to occasional foods, not routine anchors. Reheat cooked meat with lower heat and more moisture. Stop at hot, not hard browned. Cut away blackened parts instead of eating through them. Do not rely on smell or color alone. Use time, refrigeration, and temperature. If you buy deli meat or hot dogs, treat the CDC guidance seriously and heat them until steaming hot. If potatoes are already browned once, do not chase a second dark crust just for texture. And if your meals need more comfort, lean into foods the National Institute on Aging consistently points older adults toward. More nutrient-dense choices across the day, more fruits and vegetables, more beans, more whole grains, and protein sources that do not force your kitchen into a cycle of smoking, sizzling, and over-browning. This is how real prevention usually looks in later life. Not dramatic, not expensive, not trendy, just wiser repetition. And when enough people repeat the wiser version instead of the old one, the health profile of a whole community starts to change. Together, through this video, you have just built an understanding that most people in your community do not yet have. You now know that this conversation is not really about leftovers in the simple sense. It is about repetition, age, chemistry, food safety, and the quiet habits that accumulate beneath notice until they begin shaping long-term risk. You now know that the most concerning reheated patterns are not every soup, every casserole, or every home-cooked meal, but the repeated return to processed meats, charred meats, heavily browned potatoes, and smoky drippings and burned bits that many households still treat as harmless flavor. You know that after 60, the body carries more history, more years, more exposures, more reason to be selective. And you also know something hopeful that too many people miss. Risk is not fixed. Habits can change faster than disease statistics do. Kitchens can change faster than communities expect. One family can stop serving reheated deli meat cold. One neighbor can stop re-crisping bacon every morning. One household can start warming meat gently instead of blackening it. One grandparent can decide that hot enough no longer means browned again. That is how prevention begins in real life. Not with a lecture from far away, but with people who care enough to carry useful information home. I want this community of people, everyone who watches this channel, to genuinely thrive, not just individually, together. Share this with your community today, a family member, a friend, a neighbor who could use this, and stay with us. Because every video we make is built for exactly you. If you are over 60, this is a conversation you need to have. In this video, Dr. Thomas Ellison breaks down 4 reheated foods that may quietly raise long-term health risks for older adults, from processed meats to overbrowned leftovers, and shows what to do instead. This is not fear-based advice. It is practical, neighbor-to-neighbor guidance built on real public health warnings and simple kitchen changes. If you want to protect your colon, lower food safety risks, and make smarter choices without giving up comfort foods, this warm but urgent lesson could help someone you love today.